It's time for another episode of the Cultural Hall, and welcoming in for this episode is Connor Boyack. Now, some of you go, "Oh no, this is where this episode is going. I know what Connor is. Freedom fighter, according to his website, Connor Boyack. Is that what we're doing here, Richie? Where are we going?" Now, let me just couch it like this. I am excited to learn more about Connor, to find out what he stands for, what he believes in, and what he thinks is worth the fight, as it were. He also is a publisher of multiple podcasts and books as well. Connor, welcome in.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Now, I hope that intro was fair. There are probably some people who associate your name with certain things and go, "Okay, what are we doing here?" And probably first and foremost, libertarian, I would presume.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
no, I definitely, when you draw lines in the sand, it divides people. Christ himself said, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword and, set families asunder. And so, no, it was, what I do, I have my lovers and my haters. And frankly, I just welcome discussion and debate and let's talk through ideas. So I especially love interacting with people who don't necessarily agree with me and hashing it out and having fun.
Sure. And I think that there's a way to do it. And I hope we do it the way that, that we were instructed in the most recent general conference to be able to learn about one another and have those disagreements. But it doesn't, it doesn't create contention, all of those kind of things. I think that for some people, though, they sort of have this, I don't know what you would call it. Maybe just like surface level understanding of what a libertarian even is. Like, for example, I'll tell you, I feel like it's like, just leave me alone and let me do my own thing and I'll be fine. That's sort of how I summarize a libertarian. How do you, or how does the party, or give me an idea of what a libertarian is if people have no idea.
Yeah, so I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party. I've got all
Uh-huh.
kinds of thoughts about the ineffectiveness or effectiveness of that institution and that process. But philosophically, I am what you would call a libertarian. I would define it as someone who believes in maximum individual freedom, not to take your ball and go home and be selfish in kind of the Ayn Rand Atlas Shrugged perception that some people have,
Hmm.
but more that like it's acting versus being acted upon. I don't want to be, which we get from Second Nephi, right? I don't want to be acted upon. I want to be able to act. I want maximum freedom and keeping my money and retaining my agency so that I can be anxiously engaged in many causes. And when the government is restricting you or when they're taking your money and telling you what to do, it diminishes your capacity to act. So for me, it's a question of maximum freedom to have maximum agency and act to benefit my life, my family's life, the lives of others. And on a spectrum between, maximum freedom and limited government versus on the other end, you've got maximum government and, limited freedom. I'm very much on the spectrum of maximum freedom. Many people will say, well, what about the social safety net? What about welfare? What about taking care of people?
Sure.
All valid things. What a libertarian would say is that the marketplace is better able to handle that than the inefficiency of the government. And that the speculative fear that like people will die in the streets if we don't have a big welfare state is not borne out by history, and we wouldn't let happen in the present and in the future. But it's all trade-offs, and ultimately libertarian says the best trade-off is maximum freedom, maximum human flourishing, empower people to do what they want, be creative, be innovative, be productive, and create wealth. And that is a rising tide that lifts all boats.
One of the things that I appreciate so much about our faith is sort of the freedom, even though people would say, members of the church, at least in the state of Utah, are sort of pushed towards the Republican Party, right? That's the big joke. Like, how many Democrats are in Utah County? It's you, and that's it, that kind of thing.
Right.
But one of the things that I find so beautiful and also sometimes so frustrating is that, as a member of the church who holds certain political beliefs, and I'll look at someone who is sort of dynamically opposite of me, and I'll think, how is it that that person can worship and follow the same thing and believe what they can believe? And I'm sure that they, or the equivalent of them on the other side, would look at me and go, I can't believe that. Is there danger, because you did this a couple times as you were kind of talking about it, when we start to assign scriptures to the way that we believe, that it sort of postures us as like some sort of superiority? I'm just doing as the Ten Commandments say, kind of throwing that's
God's on my
tyranny.
side, not your
Yeah,
side,
yeah,
kind of thing,
exactly.
right?
There
Yeah.
is some danger in that. Do you think so?
I think there's danger. I think there's nuance, but also I think we have to try. Like the whole point of scripture is to be applied in not just theoretical, abstract talk and gospel doctrine and conceptual vague term,
Mhm.
approaches, but like the nitty gritty daily, what does this mean? I don't believe in a gospel of, of the Sabbath where we go to church and we put our church hat on, we go home, we take our church hat off, and then we just do whatever we want and act in whatever ways we want. I think the gospel ultimately is an instruction manual for daily living, and therefore it's an imperative to figure out how to apply those scriptures to the nitty gritty. There will be disagreement. I mean, the early apostles couldn't, agree with each other, and Jesus spoke in parables that had different levels of understanding for, people at different times. So I think we have to be compassionate and charitable with people who may disagree with us. I don't think it's a, scripture Pokemon card where it's like, well, I have a general authority that says this, and so I beat your general authority card. I don't think it should be weaponized or
Sure.
combative, but I do think we need to learn from the best books, as DNC says. We need to counsel together. We need to learn together. I think we have to try. It's going to be messy. We're going to have disagreement, but I think there's joy in the journey, and I think that's the whole point of these revelations in Scripture, is to help us work through it in that kind of very daily, practical sense, and figure out how to apply those scriptures to daily living.
I like the idea of spiritual Pokemon cards. That was sort of funny to me, and I see that play out on the internet, right? Like, oh, I heard this talk at a fireside, and that supplements the way that I believe, and then I share that, and someone goes, oh, no, 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 and then they share it, and then what seemed like for a good long time the kind of the superior Pokemon card was, well, Ezra Taft Benson said, and then we sort of lay that card, and we're like, prophet. And you even see that sort of being referenced, like I said, in that most recent general conference, where they're like, "Hey guys, first of all, it's we're dealing, we're loving, we're getting to know each other, and there will be disagreements, but also too, like, we don't weaponize the words of past prophets." I thought that to be extremely powerful for both the left, the right, the middle, all those kind of sides.
So you're speaking about Elder Haney. I actually plan to do a podcast episode. I have a podcast called Sunday Musings where I just kind of share my thoughts on religious freedom, political kind of stuff. And so my intention right now is that Sundays is going to be about this exact talk that you bring up. I've got the quote right here.
Mm-hmm.
Elder Haney says, "Unlike vintage comic books and classic cars, prophetic teachings do not become more valuable with age. That's why we should not seek to use the words of past prophets to dismiss the teachings of living prophets." And then he had the water bottle example followed.
Sure.
Like, so I actually quibble with this a little bit. I don't know that I entirely agree with what he said. I think of Jesus saying, search these things, a commandment I give unto you to search these things diligently. Great are the words of Isaiah. We know that, John and Nephi and these others have seen everything. The brother of Jared, and true prophecy, I think, does get better with age, in the sense that you see it come true and you see the early wisdom of it. And so I don't know that I love this idea about discarding the past just because we have living prophets, both for that reason, but also I reject the idea that we should crush. I mean, I know it was kind of meant in a little bit of jest, but like we see this in our church culture, like follow the prophet in a very literal sense. A lot of people struggled with, when President Nelson said, hey, get vaccinated, it's safe and effective, and do all this. And a lot of people were like, well, wait a minute, like my doctor says something different, or I have this health circumstance that puts me at higher risk or whatever. And people were having to grapple with, well, wait a minute, because he said it, does that mean it's prophetic? And as a
Mm-hmm.
church culture, I think we err very much on the side of whatever President Nelson or his predecessors say is prophetic because they're a prophet. Yet we have
Right.
Joseph Smith. Again, here I come with my spiritual Pokemon card, or
Sure.
referencing an early prophet. Heaven forbid I bring back Joseph into the conversation. But he said a prophet is only a prophet when acting as such. There were people who were questioning it, all his different activities, the banking decisions he was making, the family decisions. He's like, no, I'm only a prophet when I'm like directly acting that. So I think we as a church culture, we err on the side of just assuming that what our leaders tell us to do is prophetic and therefore from God. And I think that's spiritually lazy. I think that inhibits us from developing our spiritual capacities, seeking out the spirit of discernment, trying to understand things. And so I get why people go down that path of least resistance, because it is easy to just assume, oh, let's do what we're told.
Yep.
I just don't think that creates a healthy church community and strong saints who have a connection themselves to God through the Spirit. I think they just, I just do what I'm told and I'm along for the ride. I don't love that. So I quibble a little bit with what Elder Haney's saying here.
Sure.
I get it. I understand what he's trying to do, but to me, it kind of is a contributor to this church culture we have that I have a little bit of an issue with.
Yeah, it's a struggle for me too, especially when I see and you hear people call it out. It's just like blind obedience, right? And I think that people should follow the prophet. So no one take umbrage with what I'm saying as far as that goes. But the thing to me is, like, if there's something that I struggle with, I sort of welcome it, both religiously speaking or like, relationally with my spouse or something like that. How easy is it if I just go to my wife and say, "What do you want me to do so this will be okay?"
Right.
Do the dishes and go wash the car. Okay, I'll do that. That's easy. That's great. Sure, you bet. How much harder is it if she says, "You know what? I want this to feel different and I want you to figure it out," and then come
Yeah.
back to me and I go, "Oh, you mean like actually learn something from this so we don't just do this again?" And I find myself in the same position. And it really is. And we find that time and time again with various things within the church. Word of wisdom is one that comes to mind, where we go, "Yeah, you bet. I'll do that. I'll do that. I'll do that." Okay, there's like there's more parts of this that maybe we're not living. No, nope, I am. I did the this and the this and the this.
We love to make fun of the Pharisees. We love
Uh-huh.
to think of them as these, just ignorant rubes. How could you encumber the gospel with all these, practices and so forth? And yet, as you're describing right there, we are the same. They're human, we're human. We want to reduce these complex, mentally taxing, spiritually difficult processes down to a checklist that we can do. It's why I love that we've moved away from home teaching to ministering, although I think the ministering program is a disaster. Very few people do it because it requires us, myself included, struggle to like do something more meaningful and pay attention and invest time and energy. That's what we should be doing, but we have a hard time with that, especially in our distracted society. And so we are a people who love our checklists and thou shalts and thou shalt nots, and then we go do whatever else we want because we know that we've checked the boxes that we feel we need to be a Latter-day Saint that has a temple recommend, as if that's like the utopian standard. To me, that's a baseline standard of like, okay, you're doing the bare minimum. Now let's talk about how you can rise above and do more.
Yeah, and funny, I think that too, because I think I used to kind of ascribe to that hierarchy, right? Like, oh, are they keeping their covenants? Do I see them in church? Oh, and have they been to the temple? And do they visit the temple and all that stuff? And then I think, I know some really crummy people who have temple recommends, and so it sort of washes it. And I'm like, there's probably something more to all that
For sure.
than just what we see. Do you see an upswell in members of the church in investigating? I don't know if that's the right word, into libertarianism. Is there more curiosity about it now? Is it more appealing towards how some members of the church would feel, or is that kind of a blanketed wrong statement?
That's a curious question. I would argue, in fact, I have on my wall over here, I commissioned this art piece some years ago that on the Deseret News masthead in the early Utah period, and then they even had it in, I think it was the Logan Temple. They created this stained glass kind of motif, and it says, "Mormon Creed, mind your own business. Saints will observe this, all others ought to." And
Mm.
this was very much born out of the polygamy era, that John Taylor and others were on the underground, like literally hiding from the government, being sheltered. And, there's like a black market basically in Utah. And so there was this kind of heritage and culture and ethos of, hey, those people are the enemy. The government didn't protect us. If anything, there were government agents involved in our persecution. Let's not trust them. Let's do what we ought to and what we feel God wants us to do. Everyone mind your own business. Saints will observe this. All others ought to. So your question is interesting because I might argue that the early Mormons were the most libertarian Mormons that we've had, just because of this strong tension between the state, and I don't mean like Utah, Texas, Tennessee state, but the state is a type of government that has a monopoly of force to be able to order people around. And so there's this tension between the state and the people. And I think early Utahns better recognized the dangers of the state and why they needed strong families, strong community to be able to just subsist on their own and not be dependent upon the state and have the state gain control over them. Of course, then everything changed, and we got the progressive era. We got the Mitt Romney, the George Romney, all the kind of like
All the Romneys.
American,
We got all the
all the
Romneys.
Romneys, the binder full of
Yeah.
Romneys. And we have what I kind of perceive to be the Americanization of Mormon culture. It's like we wanted to fit in, we wanted to be
Mhm.
well liked. David O. McKay, right? Here's this guy in this white suit, no longer having a beard. He's trying to like really connect with the culture, and it makes sense for missionary work to have people want to like you and not think that you're these weird, whatever. But I think, again, to your question, I think we tried so much to become kind of the Americana that's when church leaders would, early on, they dissolved the People's Party in Utah. They assigned members to, you got to be Republican, you got to be Democrat. We want statehood. We got to appease the different political factions. So I think we veered a lot away from that. You see this nationally with conservatives, this very nationalist strain within Christianity, where you even have evangelical churches with like Trump posters and American flags and this kind of fusion of politics and religion within the church. And so I think on the right, of conservatives, Republicans, whatever, in the church, I think they're not veering more libertarian. I think they're veering a little bit more nationalist,
Hmm.
which I have a concern with, because I think we're all God's children. I think borders are imaginary lines on a map, and I don't think we should be, xenophobic, jingoistic, or exclusionary. So no, I think the good old days for libertarian Mormons was probably a century and a half ago. But I am one who thinks that our gospel is a kind of libertarian gospel, that we are not judged collectively, we're judged individually. We're supposed to work out our own salvation. And yes, we have obligations and commandments to help and to do things. As I said, I guess what you might call an altruistic libertarian, and not that kind of more selfish one that many people perceive. And so I think there's a lot of compatibility. I argue there is, I believe there is, and I try and live authentically that way. But broadly within the church, which I think is kind of what you're asking, no, I don't see a trend
That
going in
way.
that direction.
I would be curious to know too, and some people to the point of like forming their own churches have felt this thing. The social pressures that the church has felt over the years, whether it be polygamy or politically or any of those things. And we're fine to speculate. Safe space, Connor. Safe space in here. Do you think that that's some of where maybe the church has lost its peculiarity or its uniqueness because we've wanted to fit in so much? Even here in the 21st century, some people have said, "Oh, we're sure feeling a lot more evangelical because we want to fit in with everyone and stop being called the weird kid on the playground."
100%. I do agree that we've kind of lost the peculiarity. And here's an example. There's a fantastic book written by a non-Mormon historian. I think his name's David Conley. It's called Moroni and the Swastika. It's a fascinating book highlighting church involvement and comments and so forth during World War II, and how church leaders and were counseling members and missionaries, and how do we deal with this whole Hitler thing and the Nazis and the war. Very, very enlightening book. And what's really interesting is the contrast that book shows between, for example, the Jehovah's Witnesses, who said, no, we are not joining your military and we are not being a part of Hitler Youth. No, we are not saluting the Nazi flag. That's an idol. We're not doing that. Well, what happened to their church? Services were shut down. Many Jehovah's Witnesses were killed. Like, they suffered for it, as the Old Testament prophets of old, when they would stand up to the Nebuchadnezzars and others who were, challenging them. And so they paid the price, but they were committed to their gospel and their faith, and they were boldly declaring their doctrine. Meanwhile, as expressed in that book, you see over and over again the appeasement, the like, oh, you're seeking racial purity? Well, we like family history. Let's talk about how we can help you with your genealogy so that you can then go like do all your horrible things. So there was very much this appeasement. There was a sanitization of removing references to Israel from church curriculum in Germany that was used. There was communications with the Gestapo and to basically say, we're law-abiding citizens. Look at the 12th article of faith. We believe in doing whatever the government tells us to, which I believe is a horrible misinterpretation of the 12th Amendment, subject for another day, unless you want to go down that route. But the book is fascinating because I think it shows, as a very clear, stark example, yes, we would have lost lives and probably impeded maybe some of the progress of the church in reducing access to missionary work and those doors being open. So while I believe that is an imperative of the church to do missionary work, if it comes at the expense of being bold in our doctrine and standing for what we believe, then I think I think we're losing something. In fact, I think while the doors are open to missionary work, we become less effective at it, because who's going to be attracted to a church that waters down its own doctrine and appeases dictators and doesn't stand for what they believe? Whereas if we take a stand, I think that would be an attractant to a lot of people who are like, wow, that's powerful, that's passionate. Another brief example, if you'll indulge me, is
Yeah.
after 9/11, Russell M. Nelson, then a Quorum of the 12 apostle, he gave this amazing address just as the war in Afghanistan and Iraq was kicking off. And it was all about peace. It was about golden rule. We need to renounce war, proclaim peace. It's a fascinating, powerful address, very timely, summarizing scripture and saying we need to not support this war. We need to be peacemakers. We need to abide by the golden rule, not just between ourselves as individuals, but between nations. And so it was kind of this very gentle rebuke of all of the war fervor and fever that was kicking off. Okay, so what happened? Massive backlash from the media. If you recall, the Dixie Chicks right around then were getting slammed because they were speaking out against Bush and the war.
Mm-hmm.
So the media apparatus comes against the church, and Associated Press is like, oh, there was this, anti-war speech at the whatever. So the church PR department goes into defense mode, and they issue this statement saying, oh, no, President Nelson or Elder Nelson had this statement saying we support our government and we're loyal citizens. And so they directed their attention to like what I believe is like 2% of the overall address that Nelson was giving. And it was a missed opportunity, I think, to stand up and say, yeah, the Lord has said renounce war and proclaim peace. It's precise, like Spencer W. Kimball, we are a warlike people, easily distracted from building the kingdom of God. When enemies rise up, we become anti-enemy rather than pro-kingdom of God. Sorry, there's another spiritual Pokemon card that I love to use. But this is like a huge opportunity that the church had to say, yes, this is the doctrine. And I'm sorry, it's unpopular with 98% of you that are just so feverishly wanting to go get revenge on Saddam Hussein, even though they had nothing to do with 9/11. But this is why it matters. And here's the direct, precise opportunity to declare the doctrine. And the church PR team punted, and we lost the potency and the opportunity of boldly declaring that doctrine. So emphatically, yes, I agree with what you said. I think we are losing our peculiarity and the potency of our doctrine when we're not willing to controversially advance it in spite of all the backlash and say, this is what we believe, come what may.
We'll leave a link for that Elder Nelson talk in the show notes. And then also, if you have been a listener of the Cultural Hall for a good long time, back in episode number 166, I actually visit with David, the author of Mormon and the Swastika. We talk all about some of those things. So if you want some more listening, it's an hour's worth of talking with the author of that particular book that you mentioned. Let's take a quick break and come back in the second block of the Cultural Hall. Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember, you can always reach out to us. We're on all of the social medias at the Cultural Hall. You can send a direct message there or whatever the messaging service within that particular social media is. We love that. We get to those as soon as we can. Or you can send a good old-fashioned email. It's contact@theculturalhall.com. Even if you get awoken in the middle of the night, and you're like, oh, I need to send an email. That's the best part about email. It won't wake me up, but it gets it off of your chest. Contact@theculturalhall.com. Would love to hear from you. And we welcome guest suggestions there too, if there's someone you feel like we should chat with. Now, Connor, you fully lean into it when you say freedom fighter. And that immediately, I think, conjures up in people's minds the picture of a certain type of individual. Is that what you're intending?
Molotov cocktail, right?
Yeah. Some sort of cosplay, and you're ready to take arms, and you've got a bunker, but you don't tell anyone about it because you don't want. You know what I'm saying? There's definitely a vision of what we think a freedom fighter is. What does that mean to you?
So it means to me that I see injustices all over the place, and I feel called by God to go remedy them. And I've been blessed with a certain set of skills, technical, marketing, communication, legal background to bring to bear in solving problems for people. How I got started in all of this, I used to be a web developer, and that was kind of my early profession. But I was newly married. It was 2007. And I was watching on the news the raid in Texas on the YFZ Yearning for Zion compound where Warren Jeffs and the FLDS had kind of moved to try and escape persecution. And so I watched this raid unfold, and I was horrified because while Warren Jeffs is a total sleazeball and doing horrible things, first of all, the raid was a false tip. So they got permission from a judge to enter based on something that didn't actually happen. So that's problematic. But the more problematic thing that I was responding to was the fact that they separated 400 kids from their, mostly their moms, but from their parents, out of a concern that there might be abuse. There was no specific allegations of any particular abuse required by the Fourth Amendment, what's called particularity, so that the government can't just broadly come in and say, we're going to lock all of you up because one of you may commit a crime. And so I knew a little something about the foster care system. And in Texas, as in many states, there's drug abuse, sex abuse, there's a lot of problems. So they rip these kids from their parents, they throw them in the foster care system. And I was just horrified at like the due process and, you know, civil liberties concerns. I had no idea what to do. I had never done anything political before. And so I started an online petition, which in 2007 was kind of a new concept, and got over 1,000 signatures. I got on KSL and other, you know, stations, my first TV interview ever. As I'm writing congressman, I'm getting interviewed by the Associated Press. And all of a sudden on my blog, which I had at the time, where I was updating people about this, I had all these people flooding the comments, especially like FLDS or other polygamous type people. Thank you for standing up. We live in the shadows. Everyone thinks we're kooky. Some of us are, you know, we do have our problems, but thank you for standing up for us and trying to fight for our rights. And I mean, it was a dopamine hit, right? I'm like, oh, like I actually, like, I didn't change anything. It's not like the government was like, okay, you know, here's this guy who did a petition.
Here, go back, take them back out of foster. Yeah, sure.
Right. But it was something, and it was standing up and speaking out. And so that set me on this path of like, how do I do more of that? And I started to realize that this was kind of the path that God wanted me on, because I had been learning and developing all these skills that I didn't care about building websites for stupid companies I didn't care about. But hey, when I can apply those for these projects and these, you know, causes. So like here we are in Utah, we've changed over 100 laws now. I'll give you one example. I think the war on drugs is totally ridiculous. I think it's frankly evil. And so
we should be able to have drugs. Is that what you're saying? Everybody gets their own drugs. Have your drugs.
Yeah, you know, LSD at 7-Eleven, you know, do whatever you, you know, within reason. But like, I don't think people should be thrown in jail just because they choose to harm their body, or, you know, or positively use a drug in a certain way that is not approved by some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. So we here in Utah we're the group that got medical marijuana legalized. It was about a 5-year campaign, and we built a coalition of others to help us get that done. Fun little side note that we can go down if you want is we had to publicly combat the church, which was kind of an interesting position for me.
I would like to go there because you're a member of the church. I want to pick. Don't forget where we're at right now, but because we're there right now, let's take on that thing with taking on the church. There was very much, it seemed like, this is outsider perspective, someone who's not in the trenches, that that the idea that the church was like, yeah, whatever, I mean, let people decide. And then when it started to look like it was going to be approved, the church went, hold on, we meant let people decide if it meant that this wasn't going to be able to happen. Now that we think that this is going to be able to happen, we've got to put our foot and finger down.
Okay, so not quite. Going back to the earlier history, when we were working through the legislature trying to get them to pass the bill that would legalize medical cannabis, the home teachers, as we like to call them up there, the two government affairs people who represent the church, and they'll go meet with the leadership and say, here's what the church wants, and then they get their way. They came and they met with the Senate president and said, we don't want this bill. And so poof, the bill was dead. And they came and met with Senator Madsen. Interestingly, he's Ezra Taft Benson's grandson. He was a state senator for a number of years, and he was the sponsor of this bill. And we were kind of the lead, and I individually was like the point person in developing all the policy and writing up most of the content. So we're in this room, the four of us and his intern, the senator's intern, the two church representatives, myself and the senator, and they're basically saying, you know, hey, we don't want this bill, we don't like it. And we're saying, like, can we get an audience? Can we meet with someone? We've got this research. We've got, like, we'd love to just have a conversation. You know, why are you here to just kill the bill without? And they were just firm. It was a very unpleasant meeting. And obviously they had their marching orders. They were just sent to deliver a message and not to, like, you know, whatever. So yeah, we had to go to the public and leverage, as you, I'm sure, know, with the church, many of the times that it changes is from social pressure on particular issues. And so we had to go do that. And we launched, raised about $1 million, almost $1.5 million, launched a public initiative. The polling after our years of working on this had shifted from about 40% support in Utah to 80, like 83% support. So we had been doing a lot of storytelling, a lot of education, and people were like, yeah, this can help grandma with her arthritis, or my brother-in-law with his cancer. So public support shifted. We go out to the public, we get the signatures, and we get it on the ballot. And so yes, that's when the negotiations happened, and the church needed a golden bridge to walk across, because if we were going to successfully pass this over the church's opposition, that was going to change the perception of the political dynamic and their control in Utah. So it was hard for me. I'll be frank. Like the first time that the area president in Utah has ever emailed members of the church to say, here's how you should vote, was on that issue. They said, Prop 2 is bad. We don't like it, blah, blah, blah. We, urge you to oppose it. And I get this email. I'm like, what the hell? Like, can I at least have a conversation with you first? And they wouldn't talk. I emailed, it was Elder Craig C. Christensen, and, oh, sorry, here's our position. And then they write a legal, so they got Curtin McConkie, which is the church's law firm. They got Curtin McConkie to write this legal analysis of Prop 2, evaluating it and all of its problems. And it was like I'm not an attorney, but like I don't have a law degree, but I do much of what attorneys do. I speak the language, and I'm kind of self-taught, and I just tell my attorney friends, I can do a lot of what you do. I just don't have the school debt to show for it.
Sure.
But and so I'm reading this like legal memo, and I'm just disgusted as a non-lawyer at how poorly it's written. I share it with a bunch of my attorney friends, and they're like, that looks like a 1L intern wrote that thing. It was just flawed logic, bad legal arguments. And so I wrote a response from a Libertas letterhead, and it's like, rebuttal to the Curtin McConkie memo. And I just pick apart each of the things. And then they wrote another one back, a rebuttal to the Libertas Institute. So we're getting into this like tit for tat. I'm sending this to all the reporters out there, and they're covering all the story. And meanwhile, I'm dealing with a faith crisis, not mine, but many of the people around me who are like, why is my church doing this? Why are they telling my grandma that she can't have a medicine that she needs? And so I'm having to be like, no, don't leave the church over this. Don't lose your testimony over this. These are just people doing what they think is right, but they're wrong. And that's okay. We can't have church leaders who make mistakes and do things wrong. But again, our church culture doesn't really support that nuance.
Sure.
So I'm having to have just tons of these conversations with people who see me as this very public person in Utah as, well, wait a minute. He's the guy fighting the church publicly, but he's a faithful church member. Mm-hmm. So I've got people like calling my bishop and reporting me for opposing the church. And he messaged the stake president. He's like, what do I do with this? And the stake president was like, just ignore it. So they're copacetic. They're good guys. So it was tough. It was not a pleasant thing to go through. And that's not the only time. I think that's the biggest time that's happened. But there have been several other occasions when we've been on opposite sides politically of the church. And it's put me in a very interesting position of running this organization. We're not a Libertas Institute. We're not an LDS organization at all. We're more of like a liberty, free market, conservative type of think tank. And so naturally, when the church wants to take a position on something we disagree with, we're going to stand our ground and argue what we believe. But that was certainly, I think, the most public time that's happened, and most public in the sense that like everyone was talking about it. It was a big issue. It was all over the news. And the stakes were very high, and the emotions were very high too. When we finally went and sat down in the room, it was the Speaker of the House, the church's top lobbyist, who used to be the Speaker of the House like a decade before. Yeah. So kind of a revolving door in Utah politics. It was myself, and then my colleague DJ, who was running the Utah Patients Coalition, the group that we set up to do the initiative. So the four of us are sitting in this room. And they were tough conversations. We didn't know if it would go anywhere, because publicly we've been like punching one another. Sure. And here we are now in a room. And so it took a little while to like develop trust and find common ground. And so we kind of had a lot of conversations, worked through it. And then as the conversations progressed, we forged a kind of negotiated compromise that we then publicly had a big press conference with the governor and everyone else. We're like, okay, hey, we all agree now. Here we go. But it was a rocky road to get there. And a lot of people's testimonies were, I think, severely harmed as a result. So kind of tragic in a way.
Something that I learned from what you said is that it's Libertas instead of Libertas, which we're
libertarians. I don't care how you pronounce it.
Just Do it however you want. And then secondarily, just everything sort of confirmed as how I know the behind the doors meetings with the church go, and everyone on the front will be like, no, that's not how Utah State politics are. And it's like, no, it's 100% how this is. I want to take a break. When we come back in the third block, there are 3 questions that we ask everyone who steps into the culture hall. I'll ask those of you. Plus, I got one other fairly poignant question. Also, I want to get into your books and your podcast as well. We'll do that all coming back in the third block. Here in the third block of the Cultural Hall, remember you can become a Patreon saint of the Cultural Hall. Encourage you to do so. Your financial support allows us to do the now 700 plus episodes that we have done, 2 a week. Name another show that does 2-hour-long episodes a week. There isn't one, especially in the LDS space. Take that. Go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. So, Connor, I ask you this question to I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer, but to get kind of an idea of where you're at. Recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been sort of a group of people on Twitter. They call themselves Desnat or Deseret Nationalists, right? And people that are watching the video. Here's an interesting thing that I find about them is that they feel founded in their right to fight for what they deem to be doctrine and principles of the church, right? That they need to be the ones because no one else is fighting for these particular things. And that is not necessarily what you've said that you do as far as that fighting for what you do, you feel to be right. Where does it transcend from these are the things I fight for to these are the things that, okay, I don't really love that you do this, but go ahead and you do you? Where do you draw that line?
Someone on Twitter just a couple of weeks ago created like a Desnat list of like all these accounts so that you could then go block all these people if you don't like Desnats.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on there. So it was like Jordan Peterson and all these like random people. I can't stand Desnats and they don't like me. Anytime we've crossed paths, they'll criticize me too. So it's kind of weird that somehow I got lumped in by association. I like this question because in a way I can sympathize with the Desnat crowd, because Connor in his early political career was far more combative. If you've ever seen that comic, there's a guy like hunched over his computer at night, the computer screen's glowing in his face. His wife comes in the door, honey, it's late, come to sleep. And he says, not now, someone's wrong on the internet. And just this very like moralistic crusade, against any untruth you can find. So where I see the Desnat folks is they're basically taking a toxic, militaristic approach to what they believe in. And it's ineffective. It's alienating. It's whenever you plant it, like marketing psychology 101, if you plant a flag and say, this is what I believe, you will attract a certain type of people to you and you will alienate other people. Kind of like we talked about before with the church and its missionary work and diluting the doctrine to, be well liked or whatever. And so that's just how humans behave. So yes, the Desnats in planting their flag and saying, this is right, that is wrong, they have attracted a bit of a crowd and they alienate everybody else. And so I used to be that way. And then I saw, oh, wow, I'm completely ineffective and I'm not changing anyone's hearts and minds or laws as part of my work. And so I completely had to shift my approach, reevaluate myself, and change how I operate to the point where, like, I have very strong positions. I have very firm beliefs, but I'm willing to have civil discussions and find where the common ground is and then work on those things. And then maybe you're going to persuade me along the way. Maybe I'll persuade you along the way. But it's a much more patient and civil approach. It's a much more collaborative approach to say, like, frankly, I love like a lot of our criminal justice policies we've got done is with like ACLU type people up on the Hill, people from totally different end of the so-called political left-right spectrum. And I love working with them, even though they're going to go work on some abortion issue that I detest next or some LGBT thing or whatever. And so I like that because by building coalitions with people with diverse backgrounds, I can better accomplish my goal of succeeding here or there or elsewhere. And then I make friends along the way. Like I'm, far more interesting to have discussions with people who believe differently than just an echo chamber. And I won't use the other word that comes to mind because it's derogatory. But so that's how I see the difference. Is like, yes, I have strong beliefs and passion, and I'll defend them vigorously. And I can always do better. The talk you mentioned that we just heard at General Conference, sometimes on Twitter I'll be a little bit more snarky than I am in a podcast discussion where we're face to face, and I think that's just natural human tendencies when you're behind a keyboard too. but I think for me, that's kind of the key difference is I want to be civil and collaborative and find areas of agreement. That's kind of my ideal and my focus. The DesNat crowd is not interested in that. They just want to get scalps and look good in the process.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing because I think on the one hand, as we were talking about the church, I think that we sort of leaned a little bit more like the church should sort of plant the flag and stay where they're at. And then personally, you're like, well, maybe we should be a little bit more collaborative. I don't know that there's a right answer. I just was curious to see where you personally draw that line and what you feel. And to me, I think so long as we're I think that the world has a great place for a lot of different types of people, people that look at things different way. And I think that when we all work together, and this is my, my utopian look of this, is if when we all work together, I think that we're better because of the sum of all of our parts rather than I do it this way. Come along, won't you please? No, I don't think that ever works. I want to get into some of the projects that you do. You have a book series, as your website would tell me, the very popular Tuttle Twins children's series. Tell me about what that is.
So we sold over 5 million of these. So
no big deal.
Fair to say that they're pretty popular. This is a series of children's books that teach kids the ideas of a free society. So we're teaching them things like entrepreneurship, the golden rule, the nature of money, why education matters, how markets work, the dangers of socialism, collectivism versus individualism. So they're fully illustrated. My partner is the illustrator. He's an LDS guy that lives in Washington State, soon to be Tennessee. And so for us, this is really just trying to help parents have conversations with their kids about real world ideas that they're often not being taught in school, and parents struggle maybe to figure out how to talk about these ideas with their kids. Now we've got a cartoon series that the Harmon brothers are doing with us, and Angel Studios, the group behind The Chosen, which that'd be a fun thing. Chosen is what I've always wanted the church to produce, but we're so confined to, we can only put in there what he actually said in scripture, and then it's not human, it's not natural, whereas the Chosen, you can feel an authentic. Anyways, so
sure.
So we partner with them. We've got a whole Tuttle Twins cartoon on Angel Studios, and really just trying to better evangelize the ideas that I believe in by empowering parents to have conversations with their kids. I think, frankly, a lot of the problems in our society are because we have weak social fabric right now with families and communities. And so my ultimate goal is to build social fabric by getting families and community groups kind of talking about working together on some of these ideas.
I know that it's not like this, but the humorous noise in my brain goes, you're sitting down and reading the Tuttle Twins with your kids, and it's like, Jason is a communist. And then it's the conversation with the kids about what a communist is. I know that's not what it is, but I just think it's this.
Don't assume it might be that we have something. No, again, it's not trying to get kids to play gotcha or weaponize it or whatever. It's and frankly, what I enjoy most is hearing from adults or parents who are like, okay, we bought the 13 books. We really liked 9 of them. The other ones we're just going to set aside. We read them. We had some good conversations with our kids and say, well, that's what he believes, and here's what we believe. But then that's great in my mind, because it's I would rather see kids raised to be developed into critical thinkers than to be automaton libertarians that just can regurgitate what I wrote in a book. Right. And so if they disagree with me or they have other ideas, more power to them.
Your podcast Sunday Musings, we sort of talked about it. What's the format? Is it 20 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it you and somebody else? Is it just, I woke up this morning and as I read Psalms, I thought?
On average, it's about an hour every Sunday. It started, a little over a year ago. I was asked to I used to teach gospel doctrine a lot, and so I would substitute teach often. And I had this whole lesson prepared on, I think it was agency, the war in heaven, and all this stuff. That was the particular come follow me. We get to church and they announce, we're canceling the second hour of service because of COVID. And I'm like, so we can sit together in all the pews, but we can't sit together, in another room. And I was kind of irked because I had prepared all this material, and it's a topic that I, find a lot of interest in. So I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to, do my own gospel doctrine. And so I went on Facebook Live, and a bunch of people liked it. They're like, you should do another one. I'm like, oh, okay. And so it just has turned into this weekly third hour of church that we lost just talking about, my challenge as a gospel doctrine teacher was always, how deep can you go?
Sure.
Because there's a lot of people at the milk level, and we no longer really have the gospel principles class where those people can go. And then they always felt awkward going there because then they look like they're the ignorant Mormons or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're all lumped in. It's like a public school class. You got to teach to the middle. And so the advanced people are bored and the people who are at the bottom are confused. And it's just not awesome. So the podcast, I think, is a little bit more meaty, really trying to focus on some deeper stuff for those who are more interested in that.
Yeah. And for my money, the gospel principles class was always the way to go. I always loved that, right? Because for me, it was just so basic, which I loved, right? It seemed like a refresher, and I loved the eagerness and the genuine approach of those that found themselves in that class. Normally new members or people who were coming back. And for me, it was like, yeah, I like
it's the nuts and bolts. Yeah.
I like me a good gospel doctrine where we're talking about like your calling an election or your,
collab.
Yeah. But for my money, the gospel principle. Is there anything, we've only got a few more minutes with you. Is there anything that, while you have the mic, both literally and metaphorically, that you wish that people either knew about you or that you want to lead people towards, or anything like that you would invite people to do?
No, I think I've spoken my piece. If I had anything else in mind, it's basically like my perspective on things, the podcast, the book, the more LDS oriented books that I've done is, I'll put it this way. We talked earlier about the Pharisees, how we like our checklist and we criticize them while falling prey to the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also of like the Israelites, how could you worship a golden calf? How could you be so stupid? We're so sophisticated. We would never do anything like that. And so where I fall and where my thoughts lead me to as a member of the church today is trying to identify, how are we Pharisaical? How are we idolatrous? It could be like Spencer W. Kimball said, that we're idolatrous from a war standpoint, that we lean on the arm of flesh rather than, depending on God. So that could be an answer. So a lot of what I try and do is, like, I feel like a lot of our church culture has encumbered the gospel, just like early church culture did, and leading to the apostasy. I feel like it's very easy for us as saints to just, have our checklist. I go to the temple, I pay my tithing, and feel like things are okay, when I feel like there's a lot of things that aren't okay, and that we need to be talking about and doing more. And so that's if any call to action I have or any parting thought, it's just that, like, I think we as members, I'll frame it this way. There's the whole sealed portion of the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about that at all. Yeah. We don't talk about the fact that in the Doctrine and Covenants, we are under condemnation still for treating lightly the things that we have received. That's there for the early saints. More recent members of the church have said that condemnation still exists until we repent and remember the new and everlasting covenant. And so for me, it's like, are we okay with mediocrity, like spiritual mediocrity, and just doing, or can we aspire for more? And can we talk about how we can get out from under that condemnation? I think this is why Benson and Hinckley and others were trying to, like, flood the earth with the Book of Mormon and get a lot more people awake and aware. So I don't know. If we're grading ourselves on a curve, sure, we're getting an A because all the other, people out there are apostatizing or wrong or whatever. But if we're graded in a kind of objective form, I think we're, maybe getting a C as Latter-day Saints. Like, we're doing a lot of good things. I don't want to discount that, but we're missing out on a lot. And so I would just invite your listeners and you and myself more than anyone to, like, I think we should be talking more as saints of, like, how can we aspire for more? Because the Lord is ready to give us more. He's said again and again. And I'd love it. I'm curious. I want to know what more there is out there, but I feel like we have a culture that's just sipping at the milk and is okay with that. And I'm not, and I sense I've had many conversations with others who are not. Some of them are leaving the church, still very religious, still very Mormon, still very believing, but they're just like, this institution is decaying from within. And I don't share that perspective necessarily, but I would love if we could have more robust discussions, and whether in church or on podcasts or out, I don't know what that looks like. That just to kind of finally communicate. That's how I think, that's what I'm kind of focused on and most desirous for. So if anyone's out there and wants to chat or connect, easy to find online, search for Connor Boyack. You'll find all my stuff and see what comes of it.
Yeah, we'll leave links for that in the show notes. There are three questions that we ask everyone who steps into the culture hall. I'll ask those of you now. The first question is do you have a calling right now? And if so, what is it?
I do have a calling. I am a specialist in the young men's. I've got a 13 on going on 14-year-old boy, so I'm in the teacher's quorum with him and having a blast.
If you could pick a calling for yourself, either one that exists or make one up, what would you pick?
Gospel doctrine teacher. It's my love and done it many times, and I hope to do it again in the future.
Is there a particular like year of gospel doctrine that you like, or do you just like the class and
Um, I hated the old, I didn't hate, but like I disliked most the Old Testament. But when I taught it last go around through that cycle, I came to appreciate that there's so much richness there that I think when we focus on the little stories that we're all familiar with, we miss out on. And so just trying to find the depth, the meaning in these stories. But if I had to pick one, it'd be the Book of Mormon. I think that book is, we think of it as another testament of Christ, and it rightly is, and it testifies of Christ and all the rest, but it's also a warning manual about how to destroy societies. We talk about secret combinations and pride and mammon and idolatry and all the rest. And I think we would do well to, again, repent and remember the new covenant, get out from under condemnation. So I most love the Book of Mormon.
the last question? We ask you to interpret it however you may, but the question remains, what is your favorite part of your faith?
My favorite part of my faith is kind of daily guidance. Other people are seeking these new agey whatever and coaches and finding meaning where they can. I think we as humans innately desire meaning and identity and connecting with the divine. And so you see a lot of people meandering down these other paths doing that. I love that our faith is, it's holistic, it's substantive, it's not just a Sabbath thing. It very much is kind of a code for daily living. And so I like that it's not just this like theological set of beliefs and set of doctrines and yeah, okay, I believe that, but I just ignore it on every other day and do whatever I want. I love the richness of it, and how any question you have, anything you're struggling with, there's some kind of answer there and guidance that you can get. And so that served me well, and I think it's what is top of mind for me that I love the most.
Nice. We hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you're not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, we'll be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.